On a calm summer morning in August 2018, a desperate father pleaded for help, claiming his wife and children had vanished without a trace. But as the layers of his story unraveled, the truth emerged. A calculated betrayal so monstrous, it turned a picture-perfect family into the face of unthinkable horror. This is the story of Chris Watts, a man whose dark secrets would shock the world. Chris Watts seemed to have everything a man could want: a loving family, a beautiful home, and a stable life in the quiet suburban town of Frederick, Colorado. At first glance, his life was picture-perfect, the kind of existence that many strive for and only a few achieve. Chris was married to Shanann Watts, a woman who radiated warmth and determination. Her social media presence was a vibrant testament to their life together, filled with posts about their love, their children, and their shared dreams for the future. Shanann was known for her resilience. Having battled health issues in the past, she emerged stronger, using her experiences to inspire others. She worked as a sales representative for a health and wellness company, Thrive, and her positivity was infectious. Shanann often spoke about how Chris had been her rock, the person who stood by her through her darkest days and helped her build the life she always dreamed of. In her eyes, Chris was the perfect husband, a dependable, loving partner who was equally devoted to their children. Their daughters, Bella, just 4 years old, and Cece, who was 3, were the light of their lives. Shanann adored her girls, frequently sharing videos of them singing, dancing, and giggling, their innocence and joy lighting up the screen. Bella, the elder of the two, was gentle and protective, while Cece was energetic and full of life. Together, they created a sense of completeness in the Watts household. Adding to their joy was the news that Shanann was pregnant with their third child, a boy they had already decided to name Nico. Shanann was overjoyed at the thought of expanding their family and often spoke about her excitement. She called Nico her miracle baby, a symbol of the strong bond she believed she shared with Chris. Their life seemed to be a storybook tale of love and growth, a family that had overcome struggles and was now thriving. The couple's home, a spacious 2-story house on Saratoga Trail, was a reflection of their aspirations. It was the kind of house that represented success and stability, a place where dreams of a growing family could come true. Neighbors described them as a friendly, ordinary family who seemed to have it all together. From the outside, there was no sign of trouble, no hint of the storm that was quietly brewing behind the walls of their home. Yet, as perfect as their life appeared, there were fractures in the foundation. Beneath the surface, financial strain weighed heavily on the Watts family. They had filed for bankruptcy just a few years earlier, and although Shanann's work with Thrive provided a steady income, their financial situation remained precarious. They were behind on their mortgage, and the pressure of maintaining the appearance of a perfect life added to the stress. Chris, too, began to change. The once quiet, dependable husband started growing distant. Shanann noticed it, but she chalked it up to the pressures of work and their financial challenges. She was a problem solver by nature, someone who believed that any issue could be overcome with enough communication and effort. So she focused on her children, her pregnancy, and her work, trusting that whatever was troubling Chris would eventually pass. But what Shanann didn't know was that Chris was harboring secrets that would unravel their carefully crafted life. His growing detachment was not just the result of stress, but the reflection of a double life he had begun to lead. Chris was no longer the man she thought she knew. What started as a picture-perfect family story was about to take a turn so dark, so incomprehensible, that it would leave the world reeling. This is where their seemingly perfect life begins to crack, where the lies start to surface, and where the illusion of happiness is shattered. What happened next would not only destroy the Watts family, but also become one of the most haunting true crime cases in recent memory. It's a question that has haunted everyone who hears this story. What could push a man, a father, to destroy everything he built with his own hands? Was it the pressure of financial struggles? The lure of a secret life? Or was there something deeper, something hidden behind his calm demeanor and quiet smile? What drives a man to annihilate his own family, a family that loved him, trusted him, and depended on him? As the events unfolded, the answers to these questions would prove to be as shocking as the crime itself, leaving a trail of devastation that no one could have foreseen. Chris Watts and Shanann Razuchek seem to have been drawn together by fate. Their paths crossed in North Carolina, where they grew up in neighboring towns. Shanann was a vibrant and determined woman, known for her charisma and strong will. Life hadn't always been kind to her. She had battled significant health challenges, including a diagnosis of lupus, an autoimmune disease that left her fatigued and in pain. But Shanann wasn't the kind of person to back down from a fight. She was determined to thrive despite her struggles, and her perseverance earned her the admiration of everyone who knew her. Chris, by contrast, was a quiet and unassuming man from Spring Lake, North Carolina. He had a love for cars and machinery, which led him to a career as a mechanic before transitioning into the oil and gas industry. Reserved and introverted, Chris often faded into the background in social situations. But those who knew him described him as dependable and hardworking. He was the kind of person who could be relied upon to follow through on his promises, no matter how big or small. Their story began when they were introduced by mutual friends. Shanann was initially skeptical about dating Chris. She was recovering from the emotional toll of a previous marriage and wasn't sure she was ready to open her heart again. But Chris was different. His calm, steady presence and quiet kindness slowly broke down her walls. Shanann later said that Chris was the first person who made her feel truly safe. He was patient, understanding, and willing to accept her for who she was. Their romance moved quickly. By 2012, they were married in a picturesque ceremony in North Carolina, surrounded by family and friends. Shanann called it the happiest day of her life. She often said that Chris gave her a sense of stability she had never known before. He seemed to adore her, and together they dreamed of building a life full of love, success, and family. Not long after their wedding, the couple decided to start fresh and move to Frederick, Colorado. They wanted to escape the familiarity of their hometowns and create a life that was entirely their own. Colorado offered new opportunities, and the Watts settled into a spacious, two-story home on Saratoga Trail. It was the kind of house that symbolized their aspirations, a place where they could grow as a couple, and eventually as a family. In December 2013, Shanann and Chris learned they were expecting their first child. Shanann was overjoyed. She embraced her role as a mother with open arms, sharing every step of her pregnancy journey with friends and family. On December 17, 2014, they welcomed their daughter, Bella Marie Watts, into the world. Bella was a sweet and gentle soul with an affectionate personality that melted hearts. She adored her parents and quickly became the center of their universe. A little over a year later, their family grew again. On July 17, 2015, they welcomed Celeste Catherine Watts, whom they lovingly nicknamed Cece. While Bella was calm and nurturing, Cece was full of energy and mischief. She was fearless, bold, and always on the move, keeping her parents on their toes. Together, Bella and Cece filled the Watts home with laughter and love. Shanann's devotion to her family was evident in every aspect of her life. She worked hard to provide for her children, taking a job as a sales representative for Thrive, a health and wellness company. She loved sharing her enthusiasm for the products she believed in, and her charisma made her successful in the role. Shanann was often on the road for work, but made sure to balance her career with quality time at home. She documented their family life on social media, sharing videos of Bella and Cece playing, singing, and dancing. She often expressed her gratitude for Chris, praising him as an incredible father and partner who supported her dreams. Chris, for his part, appeared to be the devoted husband and father Shanann described. He worked long hours as an oil field operator, but still found time to be actively involved in his daughters' lives. He played games with them, read bedtime stories, and helped Shanann around the house. Their family seemed like a team, each member playing a role to create a loving and supportive environment. In 2018, the Watts were thrilled to announce that Shanann was pregnant with their third child, a boy they had already decided to name Nico Lee Watts. Shanann called Nico their miracle baby, a symbol of the strong bond she believed she shared with Chris. She was 15 weeks along, and excitedly shared updates about the pregnancy on social media, dreaming of the day their family of 5 would be complete. Their home on Saratoga Trail, with its neatly kept lawn and spacious interior, was a reflection of their hard work and the life they had built together. Neighbors described the Watts as a friendly, quiet family who seemed to have everything under control. On the surface, there were no signs of discord, just a loving couple raising 2 beautiful daughters and preparing to welcome a new baby. But beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. Financial stress loomed over the family, with debts piling up and a looming foreclosure threatening their stability. Chris, once a steady and dependable presence, began to grow distant. Shanann noticed the change, but chalked it up to the pressures of work and their financial struggles. She believed they could work through anything together, as they always had. What no one could have predicted was that the cracks in their seemingly perfect life would soon widen, revealing secrets that would shatter their family and horrify the nation. What began as a love story filled with hope and promise was about to take a devastating turn. It began in the quiet hours of the early morning on August 13, 2018. Shanann Watts returned home to Frederick, Colorado, after a business trip to Arizona. It was just after 1:45 a.m., and her friend Nicole Atkinson had dropped her off. Shanann had been exhausted, worn down from the travel and the emotional weight of her recent conversations with her husband, Chris. Their marriage, once filled with love and partnership, had been strained in recent months. Shanann had spent much of her trip trying to understand Chris's sudden coldness, sending texts that alternated between frustration and hope, desperately trying to bridge the emotional distance growing between them. Despite her concerns, Shanann was optimistic as she stepped into their spacious home. She was pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy she had named Nico. She believed that with enough communication, enough effort, they could overcome this rough patch. She wanted to fight for her marriage and for her family. Later that morning, as the sun rose over Frederick, Nicole Atkinson began to grow uneasy. Shanann had been scheduled for a 9 a.m. OBGYN appointment, an important checkup for her high-risk pregnancy. Shanann never missed appointments, especially one as critical as this. Yet she wasn't answering calls or texts. Nicholas, who was both a friend and a strong support system for Shanann, knew this behavior was completely out of character. Shanann was punctual, detail-oriented, and meticulous when it came to her health and the well-being of her children. Something felt wrong. Nicole drove to the Watts home around lunchtime. As she pulled into the driveway, her concern deepened. Shanann's car, a white Lexus, was parked in its usual spot. This confirmed what she already feared. Shanann hadn't gone anywhere. Nicole knocked on the door, calling out for her friend, but there was no answer. She tried peering through the windows, but saw no sign of activity inside. With her heart racing, Nicole dialed Shanann's husband, Chris Watts. Chris, who claimed to be at work, appeared calm when Nicole explained her concern. He told her not to worry, suggesting that Shanann had probably taken the kids to a play date or to a friend's house. But this explanation didn't sit right with Nicole. She knew Shanann well enough to know she wouldn't leave without her phone, wallet, or medication for her lupus, which were all critical to her daily routine. Growing increasingly alarmed, Nicole called the Frederick Police Department to request a welfare check. By 1:40 p.m., Officer Coonrod arrived at the Watts home. He knocked on the door, peered through windows, and scanned the property, but there was no sign of Shanann or the girls. Chris, having been notified of the police presence, hurried home from work. When he arrived, he appeared composed, offering a friendly greeting to the officer and Nicole. His demeanor was cooperative, but there was a subtle unease about him, something that Nicole noticed immediately. It was almost as if he was trying too hard to appear calm. Chris invited the officer inside, and together they began searching the house. The first thing that struck them was the eerie silence. Shanann's purse sat on the kitchen counter, untouched. Her phone was found on a couch, still powered on. Her wedding ring was neatly placed on the nightstand in the master bedroom, a chilling detail that seemed out of place. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, leaving behind all the items she would never leave without. The children's belongings were still in the house too. Backpacks, toys, even their favorite blankets. Yet their beds were unmade, and the blankets themselves were missing. In the kitchen, There was no sign of breakfast dishes or any indication that the family had started their day normally. It was as though time had stopped inside the Watts home. Outside, the search for answers continued. A neighbor, Nate, approached the officers and offered to show them security footage from his home surveillance system. The footage revealed something startling. In the early hours of the morning, Chris had backed his truck into the driveway and loaded what appeared to be several heavy items into the vehicle. The video didn't capture what he was moving, but the behavior was unusual, especially for someone who claimed to have left for work that morning as usual. When asked about it, Chris explained that he had been loading tools for work, a response that raised more questions than it answered. Nate, the neighbor, later remarked that Chris's demeanor was strange. Normally reserved and quiet, Chris was now overly talkative and jittery. He kept pacing, rubbing his hands together and avoiding eye contact. To those who knew him, it was clear that something was off. As the day stretched on, the case gained traction. Shanann and her daughters were officially reported missing, and the local news began covering the story. Chris appeared on television, standing in front of his home and pleading for their safe return. His words were desperate, his tone somber, but his eyes betrayed no emotion. He told reporters, "I just want them back. I just want to know they're okay. If someone has them, please bring them back." But behind the scenes, investigators were already questioning the narrative. Shanann's disappearance, along with that of her daughters, didn't fit the pattern of a typical missing person case. The untouched belongings, the unmade beds, the footage of Chris's truck, all of it pointed to something far more alarming. What had really happened inside the Watts home in the early hours of August 13th? The answers, when they came, would shock the world and reveal the chilling truth behind the disappearance of Shanann, Bella, and Cece Watts. In the days following Shanann and the girls' disappearance, Chris Watts positioned himself as a heartbroken husband and father, desperately searching for answers. Standing in front of cameras, his expression carefully controlled, he pleaded for their safe return. In his monotone voice, he described how much he missed his daughter's laughter and how his life felt empty without them. "I just want them back," he repeated, staring directly into the camera, as though speaking to someone who might be watching and holding his family captive. Chris explained to the public that Shanann had returned home from a work trip early that morning and they had talked briefly before she and the girls vanished. His narrative painted a picture of a man stunned and confused by the sudden disappearance of his family. He was cooperative with authorities, granting them access to the family's home, answering questions, and even doing interviews with local news stations. To the casual observer, Chris might have seemed like a grieving husband, holding out hope that his wife and daughters would walk through the door at any moment. But not everyone was convinced. Detectives, trained to notice inconsistencies and shifts in behavior, began to see cracks in Chris's story. His demeanor raised red flags. His flat tone, his lack of visible anxiety, and his awkward body language didn't align with what one would expect from a man in his position. Neighbors, too, commented on his composure, saying it seemed unnaturally calm. During one televised interview, Chris even managed a faint smile, an image that would later haunt viewers who learned the truth. Inside the Watts home, investigators began piecing together a story that didn't match Chris's account. They noticed that Shanann's personal belongings, including her purse, phone, and keys, were all left behind, strange for a woman who, according to Chris, had simply walked out with the kids. Additionally, the sheets from the master bedroom were missing, and a neighbor's security footage added another layer of suspicion. The footage showed Chris's truck back into the driveway in the early hours of August 13, long before he claimed to have discovered his family missing. The video showed him loading something large into the truck, a chilling piece of evidence that would later confirm detectives' worst fears. As investigators delved deeper, they learned about the tension in the Watts marriage. Shanann's close friends revealed that she had been confiding in them about Chris's growing distance in recent months. Text messages from Shanann painted a picture of a wife desperate to salvage her marriage, pleading with Chris to communicate and reconnect. But Chris's responses were cold and evasive, often brushing her off. Friends described Shanann as heartbroken, but determined to keep her family together for the sake of their children and their unborn son, Nico. By now, law enforcement suspected Chris was hiding something. They asked him to take a polygraph test, a tool often used to measure truthfulness. Chris agreed, perhaps believing he could outsmart the test, or that his cooperation would keep suspicions at bay. The test results, however, were damning. Chris failed the polygraph, and his demeanor began to shift. Confronted with the evidence stacking against him, his once calm facade started to crumble. Investigators pressed Chris, showing him the footage of his truck, the failed polygraph results, and the gaps in his story. Chris initially tried to redirect blame, claiming that Shanann had killed their daughters and that he had killed her in a fit of rage to protect the children. It was a shocking twist, but the detectives weren't convinced. Knowing that the real story would eventually come to light, under mounting pressure and after hours of interrogation, Chris finally broke. The story he told was far darker than anyone could have imagined. In a calm yet chilling confession, Chris admitted to murdering Shanann during an argument in their bedroom. According to Chris, the confrontation escalated when Shanann accused him of being distant and questioned whether he was having an affair. Overwhelmed, Chris strangled her until she stopped moving. But his crimes didn't stop there. With Shanann's lifeless body lying in their home, Chris turned his attention to Bella and Cece, who were still asleep in their beds. In an act that defies comprehension, he carried out the unthinkable. One by one, he smothered his daughters, silencing their cries for help and their pleas for their mother. Bella's final words, "Daddy, no," would later haunt the investigators and everyone who heard Chris's confession. After the murders, Chris methodically cleaned up and planned his next steps. He loaded Shanann's body into his truck, followed by the bodies of Bella and Cece. In the early morning hours, he drove to a remote oil field where he worked, a place he believed would conceal his crimes. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave and placed Bella and Cece's bodies in 2 large oil tanks, their tiny forms submerged in crude oil. The calculated nature of his actions left investigators and the public stunned. End quote. When Chris led authorities to the site days later, the grim discovery confirmed what many had feared. Shanann, Bella, and Cece had not simply vanished. Their lives had been stolen by the very man who was supposed to protect them. The world watched in horror as the story unfolded, struggling to comprehend how a father and husband could commit such a heinous act. Chris's initial pleas for their safe return, once seen as heartfelt, were now viewed as cold manipulation, a desperate attempt to cover his tracks and maintain the image of a grieving husband. The discovery of the bodies marked the end of the search, but opened the door to a deeper mystery. Why? Why would Chris Watts, a man who seemed to have it all, destroy his family in such a brutal and calculated way? As the case moved forward, the answers would reveal a shocking portrait of deceit, selfishness, and betrayal that left an indelible mark on all who followed the case. When Shanann Watts and her daughters were reported missing on August 13, 2018, Chris Watts appeared cooperative, even concerned. He invited police officers into their home, showing them the empty bedrooms of his daughters and the absence of Shanann's belongings. But from the very beginning, something about his demeanor didn't sit right with investigators. Chris's story began to unravel as law enforcement scrutinized every detail. He claimed that Shanann had taken the girls to visit a friend after an emotional conversation about separating. Yet, Shanann's car was still parked in the driveway, and her purse, keys, and phone were all found inside the house. She had also missed a critical doctor's appointment for her pregnancy, something completely out of character for the meticulous and responsible mother. As police reviewed the home's security footage, inconsistencies in Chris's behavior became more apparent. A neighbor's surveillance camera captured Chris backing his truck into the driveway early on the morning of Shanann's disappearance. He claimed he was loading tools for work, but investigators grew suspicious. Why would he park his truck so close to the garage, an unusual habit for him, if he was just preparing for his day? The breaking point came during his interviews with the police. Chris's demeanor was strangely calm and detached for someone whose family was missing. He avoided eye contact, spoke in vague terms, and seemed more focused on managing appearances than on finding his wife and children. The more questions investigators asked, the more his answers seemed rehearsed and hollow. His statements lacked the urgency or emotional intensity one would expect from a desperate husband and father. Then came the polygraph test. Chris agreed to take it, confident he could maintain his story. But when the results came back, it was clear he had failed. The test didn't just indicate deception. It confirmed what detectives had begun to suspect. Chris knew far more than he was letting on. Faced with mounting evidence and relentless questioning, Chris' had carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Detectives pressed him on the contradictions in his statements, the discrepancies between his timeline and the security footage, and his oddly emotionless behavior. Feeling the pressure, Chris finally admitted to having an affair with a coworker, Nicole Kessinger, but he continued to insist he had nothing to do with his family's disappearance. But the net was closing in. Investigators had pieced together enough to confront Chris directly. In a tense interrogation, they proposed a scenario. What if Shanann had harmed the girls, and Chris, in a fit of rage, retaliated? Desperate to shift the blame and hoping for a way out, Chris seized the opportunity. He admitted to killing Shanann, but claimed it was only after she had killed Bella and Cece. It was a story riddled with inconsistencies, and investigators knew it. Chris's confession, while partial and self-serving, opened the door for a deeper investigation. He had painted himself into a corner, and the truth was beginning to emerge. It was only a matter of time before the full extent of his horrific actions came to light. As investigators peeled back the layers of Chris Watts's life, they uncovered a stunning revelation that would change the course of their investigation. Chris was having an affair with Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum. Nicole was an intelligent, ambitious environmental coordinator who had started a romantic relationship with Chris just a few weeks before Shanann and the girls disappeared. At first glance, their relationship might have seemed like a typical office romance, but its role in unraveling the truth behind this horrific crime would prove to be far more significant. The story behind them will shock anyone who is sensitive to their rise. The backstory behind the lead-up to their trial is a masterclass in whatever truth may lie ahead for humankind in the future. Chris had met Nicole during a routine interaction at work. She later told investigators that she found him attractive and charismatic, qualities that initially drew her to him. Chris, in turn, was captivated by Nicole's adventurous spirit and independence. Their connection quickly grew beyond the boundaries of a casual relationship, becoming a passionate affair that consumed Chris's attention and energy. For Nicole, Chris presented himself as a man trapped in a failing marriage. He assured her that his relationship with Shanann was over, claiming that they were in the process of separating and that the divorce was imminent. Nicole believed him, trusting his version of events without suspicion. As the relationship deepened, Chris's lies became more elaborate. He went to great lengths to hide the affair from Shanann and their circle of friends. Text messages and phone records revealed that Chris was in constant communication with Nicole, exchanging affectionate messages and discussing plans for their future together. Their relationship wasn't just a fleeting distraction, it was a full-blown romance that Chris was willing to risk everything for. Just days before Shanann's disappearance, Chris and Nicole went on a romantic weekend getaway to the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. While Shanann was away visiting family and trying to work on their marriage, Chris was out with Nicole, building a vision of a new life. When Shanann and the girls disappeared, Nicole was initially unaware of the events that had transpired. She continued to communicate with Chris, who acted as though everything was normal. He texted her about mundane topics and reassured her of his commitment to their future. However, as the media began to cover the case, Nicole started to piece together the horrifying reality of what had happened. Feeling betrayed and shocked, she decided to come forward and share everything she knew with the police. Nicole's cooperation with law enforcement became a turning point in the case. She provided investigators with access to her phone records, text messages, and even detailed accounts of her interactions with Chris. The evidence she handed over painted a damning picture of Chris's deception. One of the most chilling aspects of her testimony was her description of Chris's demeanor in the days following the murders. He shortened his long sobbing and sounded gradually longer, and they began to discuss their future as if nothing had happened, and the girls was underway. Chris talked about mundane things and continued to discuss their future as if nothing had happened. The text messages between Chris and Nicole revealed his state of mind leading up to the murders. He had expressed a desire to start fresh, to have a life free from the obligations of his current situation. Nicole's account of their conversations showed that Chris had meticulously planned his new life, one that didn't include Shanann, Bella, Celeste, or even the unborn Nico. For Chris, the affair wasn't just a romantic escape. It was the catalyst for a horrifying decision that he believed would allow him to pursue the life he wanted. Investigators used the evidence provided by Nicole to construct a timeline of events. The texts, phone calls, and meetings between her and Chris demonstrated the extent to which he had been living a double life. It also became clear that Chris's relationship with Nicole played a significant role in his motivations. He saw her as a symbol of freedom, a way to shed the weight of his family obligations and start over. Nicole's decision to cooperate with law enforcement was pivotal in unraveling the truth about Chris Watts. Her detailed account of their relationship and her willingness to share evidence showed the extent of Chris's deception and his capacity for manipulation. Nicole, who had believed she was building a future with an honest and loving partner, was devastated to learn the truth. She described feeling betrayed and horrified that Chris could have committed such an unimaginable crime while maintaining his relationship with her. The affair wasn't just a detail in the investigation. It was the lens through which the world began to understand Chris Watts. It revealed a man who was willing to destroy everything he had built, everything he claimed to love, for the promise of something new. Nicole's testimony and the evidence she provided illuminated the depths of Chris's lies, showing how his double life was intricately tied to the decisions that led to the murders. Her cooperation was instrumental in bringing those lies to light, exposing Chris for who he truly was. The aftermath of the Watts family tragedy was an emotional earthquake, sending ripples of devastation through the families involved, the close-knit community of Frederick, Colorado, and ultimately the nation. For Shanann's family, the Rzuceks, the grief was overwhelming, a loss so profound it defied comprehension. Frank and Sandra Rzucek, Shanann's parents, had adored their daughter, their granddaughters Bella and Celeste, and were eagerly awaiting the arrival of their grandson, Nico. The realization that all of them were gone, taken in such a brutal and senseless manner, was an unbearable weight to carry. In the days following the murders, the Rzuceks were inundated with a mix of sorrow and betrayal. Chris, the man they had once welcomed into their family as a son, the man Shanann had praised endlessly, was revealed to be the one responsible. They struggled with the harrowing betrayal of trust. Sandra Rzucek, in particular, often spoke about how Shanann had loved Chris unconditionally, standing by him and supporting him through every challenge. To learn that this love and devotion had been met with such cold, calculated cruelty was a blow that shattered the very foundation of their world. In emotional interviews and later during the court proceedings, Shanann's family spoke about the kind of person she was. They described her as a light in the lives of everyone who knew her, resilient, hardworking, and endlessly devoted to her children. Frank Rzucek, her father, struggled to hold back tears as he remembered the happiness Shanann had brought to their family, how proud they were of her, and how her love for Bella and Celeste was evident in everything she did. "She didn't deserve this. None of them did," he said in one particularly heart-wrenching statement. For Bella and Cece, the loss was even harder to bear. These were innocent, joyful children who had their whole lives ahead of them. Bella, the older of the two, was a gentle, kind-hearted little girl who adored her family and took pride in being a big sister to Cece. Cece, with her lively and playful nature, was full of boundless energy, lighting up every room she entered. The family remembered how Bella loved to sing and how Cece's laughter could brighten the darkest day. And then there was Nico, a life that never even had the chance to begin. Sandra described her unborn grandson as a symbol of hope and joy, a blessing they were eagerly waiting to welcome. Now, all that was left were memories, videos, and photographs, remnants of a life that had been cruelly stolen. The community of Frederick, Colorado was equally shaken. This was a small suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, and safety feels like a given. Neighbors who had seen the Watts family at barbecues, playing in their yard or out on walks, were left reeling. Many of them recalled Shanann as outgoing and friendly, someone who always greeted them with a smile. Chris, they said, was quieter, but seemed like a devoted father. The idea that such a heinous crime could happen in their peaceful town shattered their sense of security. If it could happen here, they wondered, could it happen anywhere? Vigils were held in the days following the murders, as the community came together to mourn the loss. Outside the Watts family home, a memorial began to grow. Flowers, candles, stuffed animals, and notes of condolences were left by neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had been touched by the tragedy. People stood in silence, some crying, others simply staring at the house where such unimaginable horror had taken place. It was a collective grief, a mourning not just for the lives lost, but also for the loss of innocence in their community. Nationally, the case gripped the attention of millions. News outlets covered every development, and social media buzzed with discussions about the case. People were drawn to the shocking details and struggled to understand how a man could commit such a horrific act against his own family. Chris's televised plea for his wife and children's safe return, made before his confession, became one of the most infamous moments of the case. Many were struck by his calm demeanor and lack of visible emotion, even as he claimed to be searching for his family. It was only later, when the truth came out, that his performance was seen for what it was, a chilling act of deception. The public's reaction was a mix of outrage, disbelief, and profound sadness. Many found themselves asking the same question. How could a man who appeared so ordinary, so loving, be capable of something so monstrous? Experts weighed in, discussing potential psychological motives, but the explanations offered little comfort. For most, the crime defied understanding. The tragedy of the Watts family left an indelible mark not only on the people who knew and loved Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, but also on the collective consciousness of everyone who followed the case. It served as a haunting reminder that even the most picture-perfect lives can conceal unimaginable darkness. The legacy of this tragedy is one of grief, betrayal, and unanswered questions, a story that will continue to resonate for years to come. As the case unfolded, heartbreaking details emerged through interviews and court proceedings, painting a vivid picture of Shanann Watts and her children as more than just victims. They were a loving family, full of life and promise. Friends and family of Shanann described her as a devoted mother, whose world revolved around her children. Her father, Frank Rizuchek, tearfully shared in court how Shanann's joy came from being a mom. She loved her kids with everything she had, he said, his voice trembling with grief. Her social media posts were a testament to that love, filled with pictures and videos of Bella and Cece, capturing their laughter, their milestones, and their bond with her. Bella, the eldest, was remembered as a thoughtful and sensitive child who adored her little sister. In videos shared during the trial, Bella could be seen singing to her mother's belly, excited about the arrival of her baby brother Nico. Cece, full of energy and mischief, was the playful spark of the family, constantly on the move and making everyone laugh. Together, the sisters were inseparable, their bond evident in every shared smile and hug. In court, prosecutors played a chilling but poignant video Shanann had shared online, showing Chris playfully dancing with the girls, Bella giggling uncontrollably. It was a haunting reminder of what seemed to be a happy family dynamic, a facade that made the tragedy all the more incomprehensible. Shanann's brother, Frankie Rizuchek, spoke during the sentencing, describing his sister as a woman who was always there for others, someone who loved deeply and gave everything to her family. She worked hard to create a good life for her kids, he said, his voice breaking. They were her everything. The court also heard from Shanann's close friends, who described her as fiercely loyal and optimistic. Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's best friend and the one who first raised the alarm about her disappearance, recounted the last time she saw Shanann alive. She remembered how excited Shanann was about her pregnancy and her hopes for the future, a future she was determined to make brighter for her children. The resolution of the Chris Watts case brought both closure and heartbreak to those who followed it. After his initial denials and a calculated effort to deflect suspicion, Chris ultimately confessed to the murders of Shanann, Bella, and Cece. The shocking details of his crimes were revealed through his own words, leaving no room for doubt about the extent of his betrayal. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to all charges against him, including first-degree murder, unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and tampering with the deceased human body. His guilty plea spared him the death penalty, a decision made in consultation with Shanann's family, who wished to avoid a prolonged trial. Instead, they sought justice and finality, ensuring Chris would never walk free again. During his sentencing, the courtroom was filled with anguish as Shanann's family spoke about the devastating impact of his actions. Shanann's father described the unbearable loss of his daughter and grandchildren, while her brother called Chris a heartless monster. Through tears, Shanann's mother forgave him, expressing her hope that he would face divine justice. Chris showed little emotion as he was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 84 years for his other crimes. The sentence ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars, stripped of any hope for freedom. While the legal case was resolved, the emotional scars left behind remained. The Watts murders became a haunting reminder of the unthinkable, a crime that shattered the illusion of a perfect family and left the world grappling with the question, how could a man destroy the very people who loved him most? As we piece together the events that led to this unimaginable tragedy, it's impossible not to wonder, were there warning signs that everyone missed? Could something have been done to prevent this? Chris Watts seemed like an ordinary man living an ordinary life, but were there subtle clues hidden in plain sight? We want to hear your thoughts. What do you think were the signs, if any, that this could happen? Were there red flags in Chris's behavior, or was this a crime that no one could have predicted? Share your opinions in the comments below. Your perspective might shed light on the unsettling question, how could something so horrifying happen within a family that seemed so perfect? If this case has you questioning everything, don't forget to like this video, share it with others who follow true crime, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that delve deep into the darkest corners of human behavior. Your support allows us to bring you the most compelling and detailed accounts of the cases that captivate and shock the world.